Myanmar is in the grip of a brutal civil conflict.
We strongly condemn the use of violence by Burmese security forces. We are deeply concerned. China needs to be a constructive, responsible actor when it comes to the military coup in Burma. Continue to condemn this forcefully.
It seems China is using intimidation tactics on both sides of Myanmar's border, threatening both the junta and the rebels. It seems to want both factions to toe its line and eventually profit from the chaos in Myanmar.
For China, everything in Myanmar is about what's good for China.
China is paying close attention to the conflict in northern Myanmar and urges all parties to immediately cease fire and persist in resolving differences through peaceful means, avoid escalation of the situation, and take practical measures to ensure the security of the China-Myanmar border.
Will the junta be defeated by democracy-loving rebels? If only this were the movies. When you look closer, something seems wrong here. Looks like China is playing a game in Myanmar and using the different factions in the country as pawns.
China says it wants to cooperate with Myanmar to restore stability in a border region.
So we're becoming quite familiar with how the US is attempting to do this regarding China. Stunt it, encircle it, contain it, and eventually divide, overthrow the government, divide and destroy China, and subjugate it, which is what it tries to do all around the world.
Myanmar, the ultimate battleground of superpowers, brink of a new Cold War. As the rivalry between the United States and China intensifies, Southeast Asian countries have been forced to navigate this growing power competition. Now, throughout history, the United States of America has devoted huge amount of resources and energy hindering China's effort to gain recognition and influence in Cambodia, Laos, and other countries in the region. For instance, during the 1950s and 1960s, Washington constantly pressured the neutralist and fiercely nationalist Cambodian Prince Norodom Sihanouk not to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. Failing to succeed today, Asia has once again emerged as a major venue of Sino-American rivalry. Myanmar is yet another country finding itself in the middle of escalating Cold War between the two mega superpowers. It's time to examine foreign influence in this chaotic and deadly four-year rift that threatens to tear apart the country. Most associations of the Southeast Asian nations, Asian countries, have already become economically independent with the PRC to greater or lesser degree, while some, such as Cambodia and Laos, have moved almost entirely into China's economic orbit. Now, obviously, the United States does not want to see China dominate, and the pressure is mounting, as observed a few years back.
Now the world is going through a complex transition. The strategic balance is shifting. More countries are keen to enhance their international roles and are competing fiercely for influence. At the same time, the global consensus on the benefits of globalization has eroded and support for multilateralism has declined. In many countries, nationalist, isolationist, and protectionist sentiments have intensified. These sentiments have reshaped their domestic politics and given rise to inward-looking nativist policies. And the result is a more polarized world.
These are indeed sobering words to American officials who seek to rally all of Asia against the PRC. First, let's examine China's interest. In terms of economic interests, China is the largest investor in Myanmar, accounting for 55% or $3 billion of the total FDI in Myanmar. The Chinese-Myanmar Economic Corridor, the CMEC, a key economic and strategic link in China's Belt and Road Initiative, is a serious investment for China. That is why China has built 973 kilometers of oil and gas pipeline from the shores of the Bay of Bengal to its southern province of Yunnan, which run from the Rakhine coast of southern China, and plans to construct a highway and high-speed rail along the same route, benefiting both countries. As part of the plan, China's state-owned entities are developing a $7.3 billion deep-water port at the Kayayup-Kafu on the Myanmar coast. A US $7.3 billion deep-water port on the coast of Myanmar's Rakhine State, and a $1.3 billion Special Economic Zone SEZ, which includes an oil and gas terminal. Now, once built over 20 years, it will link the Kayayup-Kapu via road and rail access to the central of Myanmar and up through the mountains. Now, Shan State and into the landlocked Chinese province of Yunnan, 1,600 kilometers away. Quite extraordinary. Now, Shan State, which borders Yunnan, has always been a gateway for Chinese influence in Myanmar. Its Kokang region, which used to be part of China, is hard up against the border and mostly populated by ethnic Han Chinese, who there are about 150,000. Now, ethnic armed allies and the Kachin army fight, capturing outposts and in the process kill civilians and cause instability along the border. Important to note that the Mait Son hydropower station, this is a $3.6 billion project located in the northern state of Kachin along the Myanmar Irrawaddy River, has been halted since 2001 and now recently revived in Myanmar. Now, despite smearing and false fabricated claims, China has made great efforts and achievement in protecting water resources on the plateau, and it has played a significant role in disaster prevention and the reduction for downstream countries such as Laos and India. Various attacks on the pipeline itself and guarding stations, as well as personnel, have been orchestrated by local resistance groups. As such, Beijing will do everything in its power to protect its geostrategic interests, and it does not take lightly any attempt by what it considers outsiders to interfere in its long-term plan for Myanmar and the region. However, China does not like to get involved in political affairs of Myanmar, unlike America. Now, the United States has long been manipulating Myanmar to counter China's influence in the region. The U.S. is openly engaged in diplomatic competition with China in attempt to sow discord in the region and force Myanmar to take sides between China and the United States. In order to contain China, the United States agencies abroad are ordered to attack and smear China constantly. Since the coup, the United States government has resumed its sanction regime against the military junta and shown its support for resistant forces. Once again, meddling by the Americans. The sanctions are the first time Washington has directly targeted Myanmar's oil and gas exports and directly jeopardized the energy security of both Thailand and China. The Burma Act and the NUG, the Burma Act of 2022, authorizes the Biden administration to begin providing non-lethal assistance to the opposition. National Unity Government, NUG, and its allies to the precise and aid package of $25 million. It all opens up the prospect of direct negotiations with all groups opposing the junta, not just the NUG, but all armed groups scattered across the country. Important to note that there are ethnic armed groups which were formed decades ago and are more ethno-nationalist than democratic. But the blood and soil nationalism that motivates them bears little resemblance to the Enlightenment values that are the pillars of the American Republic. The Act promises to hold accountable perpetrators of human rights violations and to hold accountable the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. As of last year, Myanmar's armed resistance groups are asking the United States government for over $500 million in humanitarian and non-lethal aid to help them. U.S. Counselor attends meetings this year with the leadership team of the NUG in support for the pro-democracy movement, including efforts to deliver humanitarian assistance to millions. A step further, in early 2023, Myanmar's opposition, NUG, was even able to officially open a liaison office in Washington, D.C. that operates literally as Myanmar's shadow government in Washington, filled with NUG's exiled pre-coup officials. There is even a push to recognize the NUG as the legitimate representatives of the government and provide its support. Thailand, a U.S. aid package, also provides $75 million for refugee assistance programs in Thailand and India, assisting aid organizations operating from Thailand and financing investigations of junta human rights violations, while construction of a huge new U.S. Consulate General in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and financial support for the pro-democracy forces inside Myanmar are also part of this larger China and the bloc association. Russian containment strategy is really what they all want to do in the end, to hurt China and Russia. Extensive new embassy is more specifically part of a wider program to reinforce the U.S. intelligence capabilities in the region. It would be no coincidence that Chiang Mai has been chosen as a strategic listening post for monitoring movements in cyberspace, as well as on the ground. The U.S. is providing more clandestine aid to the resistance than it publicly acknowledges, including through elements in the Thai military known to be sympathetic with certain ethnic armies. Thailand also relies on Myanmar's natural gas and so has an incentive not to rile the generals through any hint it may be funneling arms to insurgent groups. The U.S. has thus seemingly focused its diplomacy on pressuring the Thais to turn a blind eye to the NUG and other exile forces that operate from Thai soil, including the border town of Mae Sot. To steer public narratives in Myanmar with a strong anti-China sentiment, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, has trained 255 independent media outlets on the so-called unbiased reporting, also enabled 235 civil society organizations to advocate for democratic reforms. USAID funded 1,500 training activities and the events to support for peace and reconciliation, and trained 258 local organizations. So why McCall House Foreign Affairs Chairman would say the following: our foreign aid must serve as a clear alternative to the CCP and our adversaries, while also saving lives and projecting U.S. global leadership around the world. It is a clear indication what is the underlying goal. Since I moved to Asia, Myanmar has been, going through quite destabilization here. The American government has been involved. We do see a pro-American where they will get a lot of the NGO organizations into this part. They will use this tactics to destabilize it. I think, Daniel, this might be where you can help us out. Maybe you can explain what happened in Hong Kong with outside influence, what that does to, potentially a region or regions around the world, the power of the American NGOs, the playbook.
Hong Kong, before they introduced the national security law, they were ranked the third freest place on earth. They had very little controls, which had obviously advantages and disadvantages. And the disadvantages that something like that could be taken advantage of. And that's exactly what happened. It's a really important part. The reason that these tensions are rising is because of America's involvement there. But any society, when they allow these kinds of NGOs in, those are the kinds of things they're going to do. They're going to brainwash their students. They're going to fund people who are going to create revolutions like the Umbrella Revolution or whatever it is. And so, inevitably, if America wants to kind of break up some of those relationships in Southeast Asia, you're probably going to have things like that going on, along with the negative media as well. When China started making a lot of headway into Africa, I can't remember how much it was, $3 billion over 7 years, or $500 million a year, specifically to fund negative coverage about China overseas.
It was that much, yeah.
It was, yeah. Right, yeah. And a lot of it was going to Africa, and there was some journalists, but they revealed that they were given offers to write content negative about China. So these are all the different components that are going to happen in these countries that China has improving relations with.
Thank you for answering that. I think that gives us a very clear indication on, what Southeast Asian countries could potentially be at risk here, unless they have a very strong support from their people with their governments. Very easy, the same playbook could destabilize these regions. And we are seeing that currently right now in Myanmar. We're seeing that a lot of these rebels, independent rebels that are backing, instability in the country, are getting support by a lot of these NGO organizations, and as well as a lot of government-funded think tanks and so on. It's the same playbook over and over and over again, and this does have repercussions for the people that live in these countries. To summarize the funding for itself, U.S. contributed at least $204 million to Myanmar in fiscal year of 2022 and over $190 million in 2021. With the U.S. interference, the most likely outcome in Myanmar would be more violence and death, creating the conditions for a perpetual war. China has been more cautious in its dealing with the unpopular SAC and does not intend to normalize relations with the regime. It has not, for instance, like Russia, invited junta leader Senior General Min Aung Hlaing to make high-profile visits since the coup. Despite considerable lobbying from Naypyidaw Tao, Beijing has refrained from inviting Min Aung Hlaing for an official visit to China. In contrast, China has always tried to minimize active conflicts and even brokered peace deal talks between Myanmar border enclave of Mongla, which was not honored. Beijing seeks to maintain relations with the main parties to preserve its leverage and stop geopolitical rivals from capitalizing on turmoil. It's not the first time the United States bankrupt, bribed, killed, bombed, and destroyed many countries and millions of people all over the world. With humanitarian and struggle for democracy message, this rivalry could bring Myanmar and become one of the battle arenas between these two countries. This is because rivalry, which is driven by national interests, has various purposes, and one of those goals is to influence other countries. China wins the rivalry in the South China Sea. China could control areas that are vital for international trade routes. Seeing this, of course, the United States has also to protect its allies in East Asia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and also in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Thailand, and the Philippines. By protecting vital areas, international trade and logistic routes for the United States allies can be maintained. By maintaining these vital areas, the United States would continue to get recognition from other countries because it has succeeded in determining the expansion of China and its existence as a world leader could be maintained. It is a far stretch to say that the United States is currently engaged in a new Cold War proxy war with China and Russia in Myanmar. Please leave a comment below by looking at the facts and making a reasonable conclusion. My name is Alex. Thanks for watching.